They gave my mother exactly 30 days to pack up her entire life, box up 3 generations of family memories, and vacate the only home she had ever known. To the executives sitting in the glass boardrooms of Apex Development, we weren't a family with a history. We were just a microscopic, annoying dirt stain on the blueprint of their shiny new $5 billion commercial megamall. For the past 18 months, they had been aggressively consuming our entire neighborhood like a corporate cancer. It started with polite letters, which quickly turned into aggressive door-to-door buyouts. The neighbors who refused their insulting, bottom-dollar offers were systematically crushed. Apex deployed teams of lawyers to bury them in fake municipal zoning violations, initiated endless noise complaints during early construction on adjacent lots, and bled them dry with legal fees until they finally packed up, broke down, and surrendered. When the corporate crosshairs finally settled on our small 2-bedroom home, we tried to fight back. We spent every dime of our savings on local defense attorneys, but you quickly learn that you can't fight a billion-dollar legal machine with an empty bank account and sheer willpower. I will never forget the morning they officially broke us. I was standing on our weathered front porch, holding my mother's shaking shoulders, as their lead acquisition attorney, a corporate shark named Richard, walked up our driveway. He stepped out of a pristine silver Porsche and wore a custom-tailored suit that easily cost more than the foundation of our house. He didn't even have the decency to look apologetic. He had this cold, rehearsed smirk plastered on his face as he handed my crying mother the final court-ordered eviction notice. He looked at me, checked his heavy gold watch, and told me, "Take the miserable settlement we offered, be a smart kid, and just walk away before you lose that too." He truly believed he had completely destroyed us. He thought Apex Development had won, and that our family's legacy would simply be paved over to make room for a VIP parking structure. But Richard, in all his expensive Ivy League arrogance, made one fatal multi-billion-dollar miscalculation. In his rush to bulldoze our lives and claim his massive corporate bonus, his legal team relied entirely on digitized, modern property maps. They were too lazy to go deep into the physical, dusty county archives. And because of that arrogance, they never found the secret, hand-typed land deed my notoriously paranoid grandfather had filed 40 years ago. Richard told me to walk away. He had no idea that walking away from that house was about to become the most financially devastating trap I could possibly set for them. The day we finally left was a masterclass in corporate cruelty. We barely had our rented moving truck packed before the massive yellow bulldozers, proudly branded with the Apex Development logo, rolled onto our front lawn. My mother wept silently in the passenger seat as we watched the heavy steel claws tear through the roof of the house where she had taken her first steps. I saw Richard standing near the temporary perimeter fence, casually sipping an iced coffee, watching the destruction of our lives with the absolute boredom of a man who does this for a living. By noon, our entire family history was reduced to a pile of splintered wood, crushed drywall, and dust. They had won, and the earth was quickly flattened to prepare for the foundation of their new empire. We relocated to a cramped, leaky apartment on the far edge of town, where we could actually see the giant construction cranes of the Apex Megamall taunting us in the distance. The first few weeks were a miserable blur of silent dinners and lingering, suffocating depression. We felt utterly powerless, victims of a rigged system specifically designed to protect billionaires while chewing up working-class people. One rainy evening, while trying to organize our chaotic new living space, I started unpacking a series of heavy, taped-up cardboard boxes containing my late grandfather's personal belongings. He had been a stubborn, deeply paranoid veteran who never trusted banks, the government, or smooth-talking corporate suits. Buried at the bottom of the third box, wrapped in a moth-eaten military blanket, was a heavy iron lockbox. I snapped the rusted clasp open with a flathead screwdriver, expecting to find old war medals or maybe a collection of worthless silver coins. Instead, I found a meticulously organized stack of preserved, yellowing legal documents dating back to 1984. One document in particular caught my eye. A separate, independent property deed with an official embossed county seal. It was distinctly separate from the main residential deed of the house we had just lost to the lawyers. As I read the faded, hand-typed legal jargon by the dim light of our apartment, my heart started hammering violently against my ribs. I had to read it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. My grandfather hadn't just bought the rectangular lot our house sat on, anticipating that the city might try to steal his land to widen the road someday. He had secretly purchased an 8-foot-wide strip of completely useless dirt that formed a perimeter bordering the absolute edge of the property line, registering it under a completely different, obscure holding LLC. When Apex Development forcefully seized our house through the courts, they only seized the primary residential plot, completely missing this microscopic, secondary boundary strip in their rushed paperwork. I looked at the attached surveyor's map, and a slow, malicious smile spread across my face. That 8-foot strip of dirt I legally owned perfectly intersected the one and only public road leading into the massive Apex construction site. I was now the sole owner of the gateway to a $5 billion project. The next morning, I didn't just wake up. I woke up with the kind of dangerous clarity that only comes from discovering a loaded weapon handed to you by a ghost. Before the sun even crested the horizon, I drove down to the local hardware store and completely emptied my severely depleted bank account. I bought heavy-duty steel posts, bags of quick-setting concrete, 200 feet of thick industrial chain, 6 massive brass padlocks, and a bright orange folding lawn chair. By 5 a.m., long before the Apex construction crews arrived, I was knee-deep in the mud of my newly discovered kingdom. I meticulously measured the exact boundaries of my 8-foot-wide, perfectly positioned strip of dirt. I dug the holes, poured the concrete, and sank the steel posts deep into the earth, stringing the heavy chains across the only viable entrance to the massive, sprawling $5 billion construction zone. Finally, I took a large piece of scrap plywood, a thick red permanent marker, and wrote 3 simple words: private property. Toll: $1 million. I hung it directly in the center of the chain, unfolded my cheap orange chair, sat down with a thermos of black coffee, and waited for the corporate war machine to wake up. The sensory contrast of that morning was beautifully poetic. Behind me was the deafening metallic heartbeat of a trillion-dollar industry preparing to swallow a city, towering yellow cranes scraping the sky, the low rumble of diesel generators firing up, and the oppressive scale of concrete foundations being laid. In front of me was a solitary, completely unbothered guy in a faded hoodie, holding a terrifyingly legitimate piece of paper. Around 6:30 a.m., the first wave of the Apex invasion force arrived. It wasn't just a few pickup trucks. It was a massive, mile-long convoy of heavy cement mixers, flatbeds carrying structural steel, and dozens of frantic contractors desperate to meet their brutal, legally binding construction deadlines. The lead truck, a massive 18-wheeler, roared up to my pathetic-looking chain barrier, laying on its deafening air horn, fully expecting me to scramble out of the way like a frightened animal. I didn't even blink. I just took a slow sip of my coffee, tapped the red $1 million sign with my shoe, and offered the angry driver a polite, unwavering smile. The situation escalated exactly as I had calculated. The driver leaped out of his cab, his face flushed purple with rage, screaming obscenities and threatening to run me and my cheap chain right over. Within minutes, the holdup created a massive, chaotic bottleneck that spilled out onto the main city highway, paralyzing morning traffic for miles. The noise was incredible. Dozens of truck horns blaring, radios screaming, and men yelling in confusion. Soon the site foreman, a massive, aggressive man in a white hard hat with the Apex logo, marched down to the gate surrounded by 3 intimidating security guards. He kicked the steel post, demanded to know who the hell I was, and barked at his guards to physically remove me and cut the chain with bolt cutters. That's when I calmly stood up, reached into my jacket, and pulled out a laminated, notarized copy of the 1984 property deed, complete with the official, unarguable county surveyor's map. I handed it to the foreman, along with a professionally printed invoice for $1 million, officially stamped with my grandfather's obscure holding company logo. I watched the exact moment the foreman's aggressive arrogance evaporated into pure, cold terror. He looked at the deed, looked at the perfectly measured steel posts, and realized I hadn't just blocked a driveway. I had successfully amputated the only legal artery feeding his multi-billion-dollar site. The land on the left was protected state wetlands, the land on the right was a heavily guarded municipal railway, and the land directly in front of him belonged exclusively to me. Desperate, he called the local police, expecting them to arrest me for trespassing. 3 squad cars arrived with sirens wailing. But this wasn't a corporate boardroom where Apex could bribe a judge. These were street cops looking at undisputed property law. The lead officer carefully reviewed my notarized deed, cross-referenced it with the city grid on his computer, and then turned to the furious foreman. "He legally owns this strip, sir," the officer stated flatly. "If you cut that chain or move a single truck onto his dirt without paying his toll, I will personally arrest you for felony destruction of private property and trespassing." The foreman went pale. Behind him, the engines of 100 paralyzed supply trucks idled, burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour in delay penalties, while I sat back down in my orange chair and watched the meter run. Less than 2 hours passed before the familiar, aggressive roar of a Porsche engine shattered the silence of the standoff. Richard practically tumbled out of the driver's seat, nearly tripping over his own Italian leather loafers as he scrambled toward me, his once perfect hair disheveled by pure, unadulterated panic. He wasn't walking. He was charging toward the chain-link barrier, frantically waving a thick stack of legal threats while screaming about tortious interference and multi-million-dollar lawsuits that would supposedly bankrupt my entire lineage. I didn't even look up from my thermos, maintaining a deliberate, maddening calm as he turned a shade of purple that matched the toll sign, realizing for the first time that his corporate intimidation tactics held zero weight against actual property law. Richard quickly pivoted from shouting to a forced, nauseatingly fake friendliness that was somehow more insulting than his rage. He began rambling about a minor clerical error in their surveying department and casually pulled a checkbook from his jacket, offering me $50,000 on the spot if I would just be reasonable and drop the chain. He spoke as if he were doing me a massive favor, but the frantic sweat on his brow told a different story. He knew every 60 seconds of delay was costing Apex Development $500,000 in liquidated damages. I looked him dead in the eye, pulled the permanent marker from my pocket, and slowly crossed out the original price on the sign, writing $2 million in massive bold letters right in front of his face. His fury reached a level where I genuinely thought he might have a medical emergency, but he was completely paralyzed by the presence of the police officers who were now watching the scene with suppressed amusement. Richard began making frantic, high-pitched calls to the corporate headquarters, pacing back and forth on the edge of my dirt strip as he tried to explain to his superiors how a $5 billion operation had been decapitated by one guy on a lawn chair. Behind him, the mile-long line of trucks had become a spectator sport. Drivers were leaning out of their cabs, cheering me on and recording the entire meltdown on their phones. For them, watching a high-powered billionaire's lapdog get humiliated by the very dirt he had mocked was the most satisfying entertainment they'd seen in years. By lunchtime, the situation had transitioned from a delay to a catastrophe for the corporation. The concrete in the idling mixers was beginning to set, threatening to destroy millions of dollars in equipment, and the city was already issuing massive fines for the gridlock paralyzing the local highway. Richard approached me one last time, but his voice was trembling and the arrogance had been replaced by a hollow, desperate plea. He realized that I wasn't just playing a game. I was perfectly comfortable sitting there until the sun went down, watching their empire bleed out over 8 feet of unpaved land. He opened his laptop on the hood of his car, his hands shaking as he told me they were ready to negotiate, but I just reminded him of his own advice. He should have been a smart guy and walked away when he had the chance. The atmosphere at the blockade turned from chaotic to apocalyptic for Apex Development as the afternoon sun hit its peak. The smell of hardening concrete began to waft from the stalled mixers, a chemical scent that represented tens of millions of dollars in heavy machinery turning into useless, solid scrap metal. Richard's expensive leather shoes were now caked in the very mud he'd looked down upon just weeks ago, and his voice had gone hoarse from screaming into his phone at board members who were likely threatening his entire career. He no longer looked like a high-powered systems architect of legal destruction. He looked like a man watching his own execution. The city's noise ordinance fines were doubling every 30 minutes, and the local news crews had arrived, their cameras pointed directly at the trembling, sweating face of the man who had tried to bully a widow out of her legacy for a corporate bonus. When Richard finally approached me for the last time, the smug smirk was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated stare of a man who knew he had been outplayed by a ghost. He didn't lead with threats or fake smiles. He simply opened his laptop on the hood of his Porsche and asked, "What is the number to make this go away right now?" I didn't just want the toll money anymore. I wanted total restitution for every tear my mother had shed. I demanded a flat $5 million permanent access easement fee, plus a signed, legally binding contract that Apex would fund the purchase of a new, superior estate for my mother in the neighborhood of her choice, fully furnished. Richard tried to protest, his voice cracking as he claimed the board would never approve such an extortionate sum, but I simply pointed at the line of cement trucks where the drivers were starting to abandon their vehicles. I told him he had 60 seconds before the price went to $10 million, and I started counting out loud. The silence that followed was broken only by the frantic, panicked clicking of Richard's keyboard, as he coordinated with the corporate treasury in a desperate bid to save the project. I watched my phone with a predatory focus until the notification finally chimed. A wire transfer confirmation for the full $5 million, followed by an encrypted email containing the signed housing contract, witnessed and notarized by the company's internal legal team. I stood up, stretched my legs, and slowly began to unlock the heavy brass padlocks that had held a multi-billion-dollar empire hostage for 6 grueling hours. As I pulled the heavy chains back, I didn't feel a rush of excitement. I felt a deep, cold sense of justice. The foreman screamed at the trucks to move, and the air was filled with the roar of engines as the convoy finally rolled onto the site, but every single tire that touched that dirt was now paying for my family's absolute freedom. The fallout for Apex Development was catastrophic and became a legendary case study in real estate law. Because of the 6-hour delay, they missed a critical structural pouring window, leading to a cascade of construction failures and permit expirations that cost the company an additional $40 million in repairs and late delivery penalties. Richard was fired before the sun went down that day, his reputation in the corporate world completely incinerated. The last I heard, he was handling low-level insurance claims in a tiny office across the country. As for my mother, she is currently sitting on the terrace of a beautiful colonial-style home overlooking the valley, a house she owns outright, supported by a trust fund that ensures she will never have to worry about a Richard ever again. Apex thought they could pave over our lives because they were big and we were small, but they forgot that even the most powerful machine can be brought to a grinding halt by a single stubborn piece of dirt and a grandfather who knew how to hold a grudge. It has been exactly 1 year since the toll booth standoff, and the landscape of our old neighborhood has changed forever, though not in the way Apex Development originally envisioned. The massive $5 billion megamall eventually opened its doors, but the grand ceremony was a somber, awkward affair. Every major news outlet in the state showed up, but they weren't there to talk about the luxury retailers or the glass architecture. They were there to interview the dirt strip millionaire, who had humbled a global corporation. The project is now widely known in the business world as a case study in arrogance-based loss, and the parent company's stock has yet to fully recover from the public relations nightmare that painted them as corporate bullies defeated by a teenager and a 40-year-old deed. I still officially own that 8-foot strip of land, and I have no intention of ever selling it, regardless of how many zeros they add to their offers. After the legal dust settled, I used a small portion of the settlement to hire a professional landscaping crew to transform that patch of dirt into a permanent, perfectly manicured memorial. I installed a heavy granite bench and a bronze plaque that sits directly in front of the mall's main entrance, forced to be seen by every executive who walks into the building. The plaque simply reads, "Dedicated to a man who knew the value of a single inch of truth." It is a constant, unmovable reminder to everyone at Apex that no matter how much concrete they pour, they will never truly own the ground I stand on. As for Richard, his downfall was as swift and clinical as the evictions he used to carry out. Once the corporate board realized the true scale of the financial hemorrhage caused by his clerical error, they turned on him with a ferocity that was almost poetic. He wasn't just fired. He was blacklisted from every major firm in the country, and is currently embroiled in a massive internal malpractice suit as the company tries to claw back his bonuses to cover their losses. The last time I saw a photo of him, he was leaving a county courthouse in a cheap off-the-rack suit, looking decades older and completely drained of the toxic confidence that once made him feel untouchable. He spent his career trying to bury families under paperwork, and now he is suffocating under his own. My mother is finally at peace, spending her mornings in a garden that no one can take away from her, and I've dedicated my time to helping other families in our area understand their property rights. This journey taught me that the big guys only seem invincible because they assume you're too afraid to look at the fine print. They bank on your exhaustion and your fear, hoping you'll just be smart and walk away, like Richard told me to do. But if you have the patience to dig through the dust and the courage to hold your ground, you'll find that the smallest piece of history can bring even the tallest empire to its knees. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, always check the old boxes in the attic. You might just find the key to your own freedom. This story isn't just about a strip of dirt or a massive paycheck. It's a reminder that the world is built on rules that even the most powerful people have to follow, if you're brave enough to hold them to it. Apex Development tried to treat my family like a footnote in a financial report, assuming that their wealth made them immune to the very laws they used to crush others. They learned the hard way that when you strip someone of everything they love, you don't make them weak, you make them dangerous. If you ever find yourself backed into a corner by a bully in a $1,000 suit, remember that they are human, they make mistakes, and sometimes, the smallest stone is exactly what it takes to bring down a giant. Now I want to hear from you because these stories only stay alive when we share them. Have you ever encountered a Richard in your own life? Someone who thought their position or their bank account gave them the right to walk all over you. Or maybe you found a legal loophole or a clever bit of malicious compliance that turned the tables on a toxic boss or a greedy company. The comments section is where the real community lives. So drop your stories below. I read as many as I can, and your experiences might even become the inspiration for a future video on this channel. If you enjoyed watching this corporate empire crumble under the weight of its own arrogance, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that people still care about justice and real-life karma, helping this story reach more people who might be going through the exact same struggle we did. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell, so you never miss a new drop of nuclear revenge. We have a massive archive of stories just like this one coming your way, and you won't want to be late for the next one. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and for supporting the journey of this channel. Every view, share, and comment helps us keep telling these stories of the little guy finally winning against the odds. It's been an absolute blast sharing my grandfather's ultimate victory with you, and I hope it gave you a bit of a boost for whatever challenges you're facing in your own life. Until next time, stay sharp, keep your deeds organized, and never let anyone tell you that you're too small to make a $5 billion difference. I'll see you in the next one.